In this video, we're going to discuss some of the common topics associated with studying and researching and writing local history. And then we're going to segue into a quick discussion on the idea of community history. And again, as I've mentioned several times in other videos, the idea of community doesn't necessarily mean physical place. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then at the end of this video, we're going to touch on some of the resources that are out there for people who want to study local history, who need primary sources, who need sources from the community to help research and to build those local stories. So first we'll talk about topics, and this is going to be more of a list than anything else. So some of the more common topics you can study, you can research in order to tell the story at a local level. And these all make up, again, the environment of a local history, a local community. Not just the community itself, but the different aspects of it that you can address from different angles to tell the story of that place. And so you can start off by talking about social history at the local level, different social groups within the community. And by social groups, I mean groups you typically tend to think of: women, African Americans, immigrants, other ethnicities and races who again, sometimes kind of get lost and their histories aren't always really well known at the local level, much less the national level, but especially at the local level. These are great topics, great groups to study and to unearth their history and bring them to the forefront. You can also talk about religious groups, labor groups, any of those types of subgroups would be very good historical topics, good potential research topics for a local historian to really find out more on, or attempt to find out more on. You can also discuss local institutions like schools, hospitals, businesses like banks. One of the first projects I did in grad school for a kind of a local history class, it was called Urban History, was that I researched a local bank in Pensacola and talked about how it changed, Pensacola, Florida, and talked about how it changed over the years. It had been there for 100 plus years, so I documented its history. I had a friend who did the same kind of thing, only with a bar. And so you can see how the idea of what a business is kind of nebulous. A lot of different things can make up what a business constitutes. And you can really use your imagination and let it go a little bit crazy in these aspects. You can talk about bars, you can talk about banks, you can talk about car dealerships. The businesses that make up a community have histories that should be recorded. What else? Local government, very important topic to study. Labor history. Local nonprofit organizations like women's clubs or fraternal organizations or labor groups, things like that. Those are the types of local institutions that you can try to tell the story of at the local level. And again, by doing that, you're also linking them to larger histories of similar topics and showing your community's place in this larger story. You can talk about how your community's changed over the years. In this case, community, I do mean town. You can discuss how the town has grown or declined, how new areas of the town have opened up, how different economic changes have impacted the town over time, transportation in the town, were there streetcars, were there trains, taxis, that sort of thing. These are all, again, things that you can talk about and discuss as part of a local or nearby history. Another really common element of local history is the discussion of families. Family life, especially, not just like important families locally, but like the life of families. Like how did families live? What was marriage like and how has it changed over time? What were the role of the husband and wife in a marriage in this community? What about children? What was childhood like for kids in this community? And how did that change over time, or has it changed over time? You can even talk about subjects such as death and how death was treated within that local community. So that's another aspect, the aspect of family, that's also kind of important. And again, you can talk about family in Brunswick, and then you can compare that to family histories in other parts of the country to kind of see how things are different and how some things probably have commonalities across geographic regions. Cultural history, music, dance, entertainment, amusement parks. Again, let your mind go crazy whenever you want to research these kinds of things. They're out there, and their history is just as valid as anything else. These are all ways in which you can document a local history, a local story. Tell that story and connect that story to broader ideas in the nation's history and in the world's history for that matter. So let's talk now again about the concept of community history, because nearby history is the study of the things that make up the environment in which we live. But we can go beyond that in the study of history. And by kind of segueing local history into this idea of community history, where just like local history, we talk about groups and different elements of a community, we can talk about a community itself. And by community, I mean not physical location. I keep saying that, but I realize I want to kind of hammer that home. Not physical location, but in the sense of community history, we talk about people who share commonalities. They don't have to be from the same town, the same state. They don't have to be the same religious denomination. They can have nothing in common other than the fact that they share a common interest in something. And then that forms a community. And in that community over time will create a history. And so you can research this. You can look into this, especially through oral histories, and find out the stories of these communities. And by that I mean some of the good examples of this are online gaming communities, message board communities, tailgaters, what else? Deadheads, fish fans, these communities that congregate, have something in common, and congregate and share their lives together and share their stories together. And you can find these and you can document these for history. So the idea of community history is important, especially now because we're not really as bound to each other physically as we used to be. Now, because of the internet and online social media, online platforms, we can form bonds with people across the world and never even meet them. But those bonds that we form and the things that we do as a group will generate a history. And it's up to those who are interested in it to want to tell that story. So that's community history. Not just physical place, but an idea to a certain extent. And then finally, our research tools for history. How do we find the things that we need to tell the story? This is where oral histories come in, because we're talking about now, what we're talking about are primary sources. And if you've ever taken a history class, with me at least, we talked about primary sources. And a quick and dirty definition of what a primary source is it's a document or some material created during the time period that you want to talk about, that you want to discuss, that you want to research. Like a newspaper article, or a journal article, or an oral history that talks about a certain time period or a certain event that person witnessed. These are primary sources, not secondary sources, which are books on a subject, or textbooks and monographs and things like that. But materials that were made during that time period, or materials like an oral history that document and remember that time period to a certain degree. These are primary sources. And the fortunate thing is that over time, many organizations in local communities, in towns and cities across the country, have collected these types of materials to preserve them. That's the job of an archivist. That's the job of a museum curator, is to find these things locally and preserve them. And so you can go into a local town, a community, a city, and you can find the local archives. You can find the local museum, the local genealogical society. These are all the library. These are all people, organizations, individuals who are preserving these primary documents that pertain to local history that you can then use, because you're allowed to go in and look at them for the most part, unless it's a private organization. You're allowed to go in and look at them to create your stories. So there are organizations out there who are preserving documents for local historians and those interested in local history to travel to visit and find the information they need. A lot of these are now online as well, so you don't have to actually go to the library to look through all the things that are there in terms of local primary sources. You can look online to see what's there and to kind of help you find what you think you need in order to tell your story. So those are the different aspects of resources for local history. We talked about community history, and then some of the topics common whenever we studied nearby or local history. And it's important to remember too that all these things are kind of connected, and as I'm going to stress again, what we do locally is important and connects to these bigger historical topics at the national level and global level that we typically associate with the study of history.